So we are here to talk about employee experience. And there's so much that's involved in employee experience. It's actually made up of several moments when you think about it. It's the moment that you get recognized by your team. It's the moment that a learning and development opportunity comes to you. It's the moment when your employees feel like they belong. And so we're here to talk about those three things: learning, recognition, and also culture. And so we have some leaders here today who have been able to blend those three things really, really well. And so start brainstorming your questions for them, but I'd like to have our speakers introduce themselves.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Carla Reale. I head up the people and culture function at Heartland Mutual Insurance. I've been in HR for 30 plus years in various industries, and joining Heartland, it's probably one of the smaller organizations that I've joined. So it's been an interesting journey, influencing and trying to figure out what's going to move the needle on a growing organization, and I'm happy to share that with you all.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tina Starkar-Thompson. I'm the Assistant Vice President of HR at the ROM. I've been at the ROM for just over 3 years. I lead the employee and labor relations portfolio, the learning and development portfolio, and HR operations. I've been in HR for a quarter of a century, so I'm aging myself, and had the been fortunate to work across several industries, including not-for-profit, manufacturing, academia, as well as in almost all areas of HR.
Welcome. Let's give them a warm welcome. Thank you. Okay, so my first question is for you, Carla.
Okay.
And I'd love to know, so you mentioned this, you have a mid-sized organization and you're really focused on what's going to move the needle. So I'd love to know, when it comes to employee experience, you don't have the luxury of a huge budget to do that. So what is it that you prioritize when you are looking to move the needle for employee experience?
Well, I guess when I first joined the organization, I guess it's like any other HR leader joining an organization, you have to start building trust and credibility really quickly. But in doing that, you also have to be a good listener. You have to take the time, get to know the other leaders, get to know what's important for the organization, the strategy, and that's kind of the underpinning of anything that you're going to plan. The other thing is, when it comes to insurance, like Heartland, we're about 160 employees. But we are close to 300 million in revenue, so we're a small to mid-size with big aspirations, but we're also competing with the large insurance companies, and we're also experiencing not a lot of downsizing, like in the industry overall. So we're still fishing out of the same pool, if you will, of talent. So for us, it was about, what are the things that are going to be important to retain our employees, because that skill set's very important to us. So it's understanding where they want to develop. So learning and development was a big one. Leadership development was another big one for us, because we have legacy leaders that are growing with the company, but they're not growing in terms of their own capabilities at the same pace. So how do we evolve those leaders, especially as we move into AI, move into leading a generation of employees who need more of that compassion and moral support. So there's a lot of new competencies that are coming into the realm of leadership. And then just looking at all of the other engagement components that we need to understand as far as a competitive advantage. Because again, I'm competing against Intact and Aviva, and we don't have that budget. So where could we start to maybe do things in a small way, pilot some ideas, and then evolve them along the way, and just have that level of agility, which frankly, in a small organization, you have that privilege of being agile. So it's continuing to evolve what those programs look like.
Yeah, the pros and cons of being small enough to be agile, but you don't necessarily have the huge budget. So how do you compete and really capture that talent and retain that talent? Absolutely. Tina, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Coming from the ROM, you have a very different perspective. And so, the ROM is a place where the public comes to experience culture. And then there's also that internal culture at the ROM. So, how does working in a mission-driven, public-facing institution shape how you think about employee experience?
So I would say that employees are employees. People are people, regardless of the industry or the organization that you work in. Over the past few years, we have really focused on a visitor-centric mindset, but realizing too that you can't have a great visitor experience unless you have a great employee experience. So we have done a lot of work in the last 5 years or so in terms of enhancing our employee engagement pieces, whether that's an employee engagement survey that we haven't done in a long time. We did that last year. Changing our onboarding and updating our onboarding processes and our recruitment processes, and just how we work as an HR function and moving from being, administrative order takers to HR business partners and really getting to know our business and getting to know our people.
Fascinating. We're going to dive deeper into that in a moment. But I'm going to come back to you, Carla.
Okay.
And so, purpose and belonging. Purpose and belonging are two words that show up a lot when we talk about engagement as well. And so, these terms can often feel abstract, especially when we're talking about culture. So, what does that look like in your organization? And what does that look like in your people programs?
I think when we start looking at our programs, you always have to have belonging as that lens with everything that we do. I'll give you an example. We recently launched a well-being program called Lead Yourself First. And it's going to cover all various facets of well-being, everything from your financial to your own physical and mental well-being. And the way we tackled it first was we wanted to get feedback from our employees. So what does well-being mean to you? Everything from their own personal experiences around what they want for their own lives. How do they like to be energized? What are the things that are keeping them stuck? Burnout being one of them. And then everything, including our benefits programs. And like anything else, you're going to get the basic topics, right? You're going to get, we need to have more resources around mental health. We want a gym at our new facility. We want to have access to, healthier food, those kind of things. And like anything else, we start to dive in and we think, this program will be great to do. Let's do something on menopause for women. Like, I think every company is focusing on menopause these days. If I think about belonging, we think about, what about the men? What about the men in our organizations? They have various needs as well. And so even though it didn't come screaming through our own surveys, we went back out and started to ask the men in our organizations, what does that mean to you? What does well-being mean? What are the things that will move the needle for you as far as your energy, your level of resilience, your productivity? And so we're slowly starting to integrate that. We want to be mindful as well as to how we do things and making sure that we're not isolating certain demographics of men, for example. But that's just one way that we look at belonging. But as well as, as we're recruiting and as we're onboarding, we try to integrate that voice and ask questions along the way, poll some of our new employees, what does belonging mean to you? So we try to integrate it at different intervals in the employee life cycle.
Interesting. And I'd like to ask a follow-up question because it sounds like the Lead Yourself First program is excellent. And so as you were building that, what went into deciding what aspects to include and how did you go about creating that and making it successful?
You really start as vanilla as possible, to be honest, because you don't really know how to further dissect what's going to be important for people. So you keep it at the basic level of, okay, we're going to look at physical health, mental health, financial health. And now I'm starting to think about the systems that enable us to be healthy. So you can talk about the more, I'll call it superficial, even though they're meaningful and important. But it's like, if I'm going to say, We need to tackle burnout. Well, am I tackling it by giving you a course on how to be more resilient, how to use better productivity tools, or am I tackling the systems within the organization that need to address burnout? The way work is distributed, how many hours people work, when do we send emails to people? Are you allowing them the time to have that time to rest? Am I, as a leader, going to lead by example in that way? What does psychological safety look like? And it's all of those other nuances that are beneath the surface that I don't think we pay enough attention to and that we are starting to delve into.
That's awesome. I love how you're diving deeper and looking at the enablement piece.
Right.
And it's not just here, let me give you a people program. It's how do we integrate this into our organization so that we can actually support you living this.
Right, and that actually starts to become part of your culture as well.
Absolutely. Tina, over to you. So museums and cultural institutions often have very mixed workforce structures, right? We've got the curators, educators, front of house staff, administrators. So considering all of that and these unique personalities, how do you build an employee experience strategy that creates that shared sense of belonging?
Well, you heard me say earlier that people are people, right? Regardless of what your role is, whether you are front of house visitor concierge, a curator, our back of house staff, excuse me. We build our culture around the organizational values. So a number of years ago, we reimagined and relaunched an employee recognition program that all employees are encouraged to nominate their peers, regardless of what their function is, what their duties are. And as part of that, we also have team recognition awards. So that's one way that there isn't that divide between this is your function or this is your employee group, that we are a larger organization and a team that works together.
Absolutely. And I'd love to know, what aspects of that have you seen to be most successful and something that you could recommend for others as they're considering putting in programs like that?
I think the piece about that the employees nominate their peers and the selection committee is made up of people that are a cross-section of the employees. So in some organizations, and I've worked for organizations where it was just management that selected the award winners versus the employees. And I think that's a huge thing, like that recognition and again, going by the cross-section. So one team, say for example, the visitor experience teams might be nominated, but it's not just them or their managers, it's people in housekeeping, it's people in curation, it's people in IT, people in communications that are part of selecting them and recognizing that the work that they do.
Yeah, getting those different perspectives.
Getting those different perspectives and getting the different involvement of the various groups is really key.
Absolutely. I love that because, like we mentioned, it's the roles are so different at your organization. So I think it's really important to bring everybody's focus together. Okay, so continuing on with recognition programs, Carla. Sometimes recognition programs start with good intention and then we lose a little bit of momentum or they don't work. So I'd love to know what you've done at Heartland in terms of recognition that makes it sustainable and authentic and as opposed to performative. What's worked for you?
Full disclosure, we haven't even done anything on recognition yet. However, but I do want to touch on the way you raise the recognition component, which is it goes off with a big bang. I've been in one particular organization where during my tenure we had 3 different programs. Because what ends up happening is they roll out with a big bang and then they start to fizzle out eventually.
Yeah.
And it's not as meaningful to people. And then you also get camps within the organization. So in one organization I was in, we had a fairly large IT organization. They wanted something different because, IT people are different, right? We need a different reward structure, and it could be like a trophy that they pass around. And so then it starts to become, it starts to move away from the overall objective that you were trying to achieve. And so the common denominator for me has always been, regardless of what program you put in place, what are your leaders doing to recognize their people on an individual level? Because, and I love the peer part, Tina, like I love the peer-to-peer is great. I love that we can do things in a setting, a more public setting, whether it's a town hall or, we've got something called the Loop where we recognize our employees on a TV screen for things that they've accomplished for the organization. I love all that. But at the end of the day, from a meaningful perspective to the individual, what are leaders doing to try to get to know their employees, understanding what motivates them, what's keeping them in the organization? To me, I think that's the most fundamental piece. And until we get to a stage at Heartland where we want to invest the dollars, and I'm going in with this level of skepticism that I had from previous organizations, I want to make sure that as a foundation, leaders are doing at least that bare minimum to make sure that their employees feel valued, know that they are contributing and creating that level of impact for the organization. And then we can gather up our employees, gather feedback, and ask them what's going to be meaningful for you as far as a broader program. Is it going to be gift cards? Is it going to be recognizing your peers? Then we'll take it to that next level.
Absolutely. And you're right. Sometimes it's the informal things that we do on a day-to-day basis that has the most meaningful impact. And in fact, I worked with one organization, and one of the things that they did, one of their leaders, after a tough week, just brought in Costco hot dogs and said, and the employees were so happy because it was just like, thank you for recognizing that we've had a tough week. Let's have a hot dog party. Sometimes it's that simple.
Right, and they're great hot dogs.
Right. They definitely work with the budget. Okay, Tina, let's talk about learning and development. So at the ROM, you've got that deep subject matter expertise, but then you also have the organizational capability side. So how do you bridge those two when you're doing learning and development programs for your organization?
So full disclosure, we are early in our L&D journey. One of the things that we have instituted or implemented in the last year or so is a Lunch and Learn series that initially started off with really museum-specific type lunch and learns, right? So getting to see behind the scenes in natural history or art and culture. And from there, it evolved to adding a second track or tier where, in addition to learning about those museum-specific areas, about skills development or leveling up, if you will. And so we've been able to mix the two. So for example, we had a session a number of months ago on, okay, so you're an internal applicant. So what's the process, not just the process for interviewing for a job and recruitment, like our senior specialist talent initiatives ran that session where they talked about interviews and all that kind of thing. The other piece that we are really emphasizing is that learning happens in all forms, all shapes and sizes. It's not just, oh, I went to a course, I went to a conference. It's like the expertise is in the house. There's a lot of expertise in house, and talking to your peers, some of that informal learning, and really starting to get people to recognize that. But like I said, we're on a journey, and we're in the early stages. But there's a lot of opportunity.
For sure. And recognizing that you both are on this journey, but you also have a wealth of experience. So I'd love to ask for a piece of advice, if you would like to leave the audience with when it comes to employee experience. What would be your piece of advice to cultivating a positive employee experience?
I'd say get intentional with what your demographics look like, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. We are now, is it 4 or 5 generations in the workplace? I don't know I've lost track. But employee experience looks different for everybody. And I'm also trying to be mindful of the fact that you can't, purely from a time, resource, and cost perspective, you can't carve out your workforce to an extent where you're going to do something completely different for people. But I think you just really need to know who's your audience, what are their wants, what are their needs, What's going to keep them there? Because what's going to keep a Gen Xer there who's probably been there for years and may retire at the organization versus somebody who's here for a good time, not a long time? It's what are you willing to invest in? What's going to move the needle for them, making sure you have their voice. And then just keep that level of agility in the organization. You don't have to be married to whatever you're doing. Just go with the flow and adjust as the needs of your employees, whatever the market's dictating as well, adjust and just go with the flow.
Yeah, that's important. You're allowed to change your mind.
Right.
And change course. Awesome. Thank you for that. And Tina, what would be your advice?
So building on what Carla said, I think that the piece about listening to your employees. So, for example, we had an employee engagement survey last year, first time in a long time, and it's not just listening to your employees, but following through. And if there's obviously going to be things that you can't do, but recognizing it and calling it out, saying, you know what, thank you for that feedback. We can't do this at the time, but this is what we can do. So as part of the results of the employee engagement survey, we have developed action teams across the various functions where employees have volunteered or been tapped to participate in making recommendations for their area. And so what are some of those low-hanging fruits? In addition to the organizational-wide initiatives. And also, I think it's that constant, clear, candid, it's a lot of words here, transparent communication, right? Because this is what we can do now, and this is what we might have to pause on for a while. And I think having that continuous feedback loop too, and have that conversation. And I think my favorite trick is engaging some of the naysayers in that process.
We'll have a conversation later on how to do that.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we're going to open up the floor to some questions for our panelists.
So my question is regarding those large-scale platforms where people can kind of give each other shout-outs or congratulations or recognition. Our organization has something similar, and along the lines of you mentioning, it goes off with a bang, and everyone's really excited, and then the momentum kind of fizzles out and dies. What would you recommend, organizations do to prevent that fizzling out? Because, everyone in this room is part of major initiatives for each of our employers, and I think we've all had that experience where everyone's excited, we invest time and effort, and then maybe it doesn't have the intended impact 6 months from now that we were hoping to see. So what is your advice in employers, keeping the momentum going?
I would say perhaps sharing some success stories as to how whatever that reward that was given continued to motivate that individual to excel. I know that's hard because I think my biggest beef, and I'm sorry if there's any vendors here selling recognition programs, but my biggest beef has been that it just gets diluted, right? Like, you get to a stage where if I ask somebody to help me do my job, so, I used to work in a company that they would do print and insertion of your, bank statements. So I'm giving Bob an award because Bob helped me took over and helped me do my job. That's great, but Bob's doing his job. He's just doing an extension of your job. So all of a sudden, we're getting rewarded for doing our job. And so that probably for me is the biggest component of the fizzling out, because then it doesn't become as meaningful, because I'm seeing that Bob's getting all these awards. Well, what about me? And so I don't know that there's a magic bullet other than try to keep it alive, try to keep it front and center in your town halls, refer people back to it and what the whole premise of the program was meant to be. And maybe you just need to revise some of the criteria, perhaps, to try to make it meaningful. But other than that, I wish I can tell you that I had a magic bullet for it. But just I'm hoping what I'm sharing is just for things that you need to keep an eye out as far as diluting the impact that it's supposed to have.
I think in addition to that, engaging your people managers, like help them to be your marketing team and to remind them when it's time for example, employee recognition or this program or that program. Yes, your staff will see it in all staff announcements and town halls, but really encourage and support your people managers to engage it sort of, frontline with their staff, and even have them lead by example. Oh, have you submitted your recognition nomination? I did mine last week, kind of thing, leading by example.
And I think those are great answers. And I think with anything new, you've got that first stage where it's the euphoria stage. Everybody's excited about it. And then we got the normalization stage. And then finally, it's that plateau. So it's like bringing back that excitement and integrating it into the daily, is it the town hall, is it the meeting, where we can get re-energized about that thing. And there's creative ways to do that depending on whether you see your team or if you've got a geographically dispersed team. It's definitely a challenge. So I appreciate both of those approaches. I think we've got time for one more question. Yes.
Yes, hi, Carla. You were talking about something super important about leaders knowing their employees. Everyone is so unique, and I think that matters, right? That what they need, employees, and then yes, we can ask them, but other than just asking them into a survey or pulse survey, what would be a way for leaders to most efficiently get to know the people who work for them? And I would like to hear from both of you.
There's a couple of ways. I mean, at a team level, we've done things called new manager assimilation. So especially when a new manager joins an organization, you want to get them at the second month. And you want to put them in front of their teams and have an honest dialogue. So the way we've facilitated it in HR would be the leader kicks off the session, they leave the room, we run through a series of questions. What do you know about your leader? What would you like to know about your leader? What would you want your leader to know about you? How do you like to be communicated? What are the team dynamics? Because inevitably what ends up happening, if you don't follow through on that step, leaders come in with preconceived notions of the team has preconceived notions of the team, and you're setting everybody up for failure. I'm not saying that's foolproof, but I'm saying that's one great way to break the ice from a team dynamic perspective. And then to follow up on that, I think it just goes back to the old-fashioned, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about, what are you passionate about? A little bit about your background. That's another thing. Leaders come in and they think that their employee, that job that they're doing today is all they've been doing. They know nothing about their history, their resume, any other skills that they bring to the table. So I'd say really, take the time to get to know your people. We heard about a stay interview. That's a fantastic way to do it. So just go back to grassroots. Talk to your people. Find out all of those important aspects that makes them unique, and then frankly document it somewhere and remember to go back to it, and especially when you follow up and have one-on-ones, etc. So those are my tips.
I see we have 15 seconds left. So in addition to that, so I think when you have your one-on-ones, actually again talking to your people, what are your let's have some dedicated one-on-one quarterly or biannually about where do you see yourself, what do you want to do. In team meetings, doing having an exercise, a fun exercise that has nothing to do with work, but we're okay, so what does anybody have an activity? And so you get to find out people what are you going to do this weekend, or what would you rather do? So that helps with getting to know them on a more personal level.
And I'll add, one thing I've seen work really well, there was an organization where they were completely remote and spread out across Canada. And they did an internal podcast where they would feature different employees, and it was a 10 to 15-minute episode where they talked about, what the employee was working on, but also their personal life. And it was a fantastic way that
That's a good idea.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
But Tina, Carla, thank you so very much for sharing your perspectives today. It was really insightful to hear from two very different organizations, and I think we very much appreciated that.
Thank you.
Thank you.